Okay, yeah, so today I'm just going to talk about coming into Canada as an international student and studying here for doing a master's and PhD. And so to start off, I'll just talk a little bit about myself and my background. I'm a Ghanaian Canadian. I was born here in Canada, but my parents are from Ghana. But I've lived here all my life and I've done all my schooling here in Canada. And currently I'm a fourth year chemistry PhD student at the University of Ottawa. Um, and before that, I did my bachelor's in biopharmaceutical science, also at the University of Ottawa. But then I also did my master's in chemistry at Dalhousie University, which is more on the east side of Canada. And currently, the research that I'm doing right now, it focuses on synthesizing small molecule carbohydrates to improve the cryopreservation of cells. If you guys want to know more about that, I'm free to talk to you guys about that later, probably after, if you guys have questions. And luckily, I've been funded fully throughout my whole PhD career by the Canadian Blood Services. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few things today. The first thing is just going to be about the application process to study in Canada. So what it's like to come from abroad and come to Canada and the different steps that you need to take. And then I'm going to talk about contacting supervisors and the importance of really finding a good thesis supervisor and also how to contact them. And then I'll be talking about writing academic proposals and how to go about that and the different components that make up an academic proposal. And then I'll just briefly talk about applying for a study permit here in Canada. So the first thing that we'll discuss is studying in Canada and the 8-step application process. So we'll go through all the 8 steps in quite some detail. So the first step that you guys should take if you decide that you want to study in Canada is to decide on what program you want to go into. So the way that you can decide on which program, you can base it off of your interest. So you can think about when you were in undergrad and in doing your bachelor's and the different courses that you liked, the different labs that you liked, the different things that interest you, and then you can use that to kind of narrow down where you'd want to apply. You can also think about which program will best equip you with the knowledge and skills that you need for your career. So if you already know what you want to do in life, that's perfect. I know for me, going into my master's and PhD, it's kind of a long story. I won't get into it, but I didn't really know what I liked and I didn't really know too much about my interests. So I kind of just chose something. And luckily, I actually like what I'm doing now. But it's really good to think about these things before you apply to your master's and PhD, just because it's a long process. So as you know, a master's is 2 years, a PhD is 4 years. So it's best if you really like what you're doing because you're going to be doing that for a long period of time. And so once you've kind of, kind of found your interest and you kind of know what direction you want to go into, the next thing would be to explore the different graduate programs that each school offers and the different prereqs that are required. So typically in Canada, you have your faculty and there's different faculties in different schools. So you have like the Faculty of Science, Faculty of Engineering, Faculty of Medicine. And within that faculty, you have different departments. So for example, in the Faculty of Science, you have Department of Biology, Department of Physics, Department of Math and Stats, you have Earth and Environmental Studies, then you have Chemistry, whereas in Faculty of Engineering, you have different engineering disciplines like civil engineering, chemical and biological, mechanical. So if you know that, like, say in undergrad, you really liked biology, you really liked the biology labs, then you would focus on specifically the Department of Biology. And within that, you can see the different strains of biology that they have. So for example, you could go into like cellular biology, could go into to different kind like statistical biology, right? And you can really just kind of narrow it down. And I would take a different approach than I did for undergrad, where you just kind of look at the disciplines, but rather you should also look at the research that the different supervisors and professors do in that specific department, because later on you're going to have to try to find a thesis supervisor, one that will match your research interests and your research needs. So really spend your time looking at the different research that's in each department rather than just like the different disciplines. So then after you decide on what program you want to go into, the next thing would be to check the application deadlines. So depending on the school, the application deadlines can be as early as 10 months before the program begins. But again, this is all specific to the program. So if I were you, if I wanted to go into a master's abroad or a PhD across like overseas for next September, so September 2021, I even think now might be a little. I mean, now you could probably apply, but you might be pushing it a little. I would rather, it would probably be safe for you to start thinking about where you want to go, probably in the summer. So by August 2020, I should be thinking about where I want to go, where I want to apply for a graduate program for September 2021, just because the process is very long. And there's so many steps within that process, especially if you're coming from a different country or a different continent. And even just to get a study permit, which I'll talk about later, it can be a pretty lengthy process as well. And so also, you also have to make sure that all required documents must be submitted by the application deadline as well. And so I've just listed a few universities in Canada here and just the different websites that you can go to look at the deadlines. So I go to the University of Ottawa. So if I click on this link, I think I'm gonna have to reshare my screen so that you can see. Sorry, I'm just going to reshare my screen so that you can see my Google Chrome. So yeah, this website, so it's really easy to use. So you can just choose which program you want to go into. So either your master's or your doctorate. So say if I wanted to apply to a doctorate at the University of Ottawa, and then I'll list all the different doctorate programs here. So say if I wanted to go into a doctorate in civil engineering. Okay, maybe that one didn't work. Let's try a master's. Okay, so say if I wanted to go into a master's in biomedical engineering, for example. Okay, that's weird. It was working yesterday. Oh, it's because I didn't press submit, maybe. Okay, yeah, sorry, because I didn't press submit. So so you can see that it has all the different deadlines. So specifically for international students, if I wanted to apply for fall, so like September 2021, I would have to submit everything in by March 1st. If I wanted to apply for winter, so that would have to be winter 2022, I'd have to have everything in by August 1st. If I wanted to apply for summer of 2021, then January 1st. So it nicely just lays out all the different requirements that you need, and the deadlines that you have to submit all your documents by in order to apply. Okay, so I'll go back to my PowerPoint. Okay, and then so for the University of Toronto, Alberta, Dalhousie University, and University of BC, I have all the websites here, and I'll make this available to you guys so that you can search through them after. So then the third step would be to confirm you meet the admission requirements. So for every single program, you have the general admission requirements that you have to make sure that you can meet in order to be considered to enter the program. So for example, if you want to go into a master's, just a general admission requirement is that you have to hold an honors bachelor degree for 4 years with an average of at least 70% or a B. So obviously that's like the cutoff, but to be competitive, it's best if you have like an 80% or an A plus average to get admitted. And for a lot of schools, they don't really look at your whole bachelor. Sometimes they'll just look at like the last 2 years of your bachelor or the last 3 years, or even just like the last 10 courses, or even your highest 10 courses that you had. Similar for doctoral programs, you would have to have held a master's degree with an average of 75% or a B plus. And so again, this is just the cutoff. So it's obviously best if you have higher than that. And I've listed some websites here where it gives, actually, I'll show you this one quickly, the U of T one. So it just gives the different comparisons because every school grades differently, right? So with every school, they have different grades. So it just gives you the equivalencies, for example. So if we go down to Nigeria, we can see the equivalent of what the minimum cutoff is. So for Nigeria, the minimum GPA would be a second class upper division, a 3.5 or a 60 out of 100. And they also give just like the equivalents for like an A minus GPA. So what we would consider an A minus here in Canada would be first class or a 4.5 or a 70 out of 100. What we would consider a B plus here would be a second class upper division, a 4 or a 67 out of 100. And also our bachelor's equivalent is equivalent to your honors and bachelor's degree, and master's equivalent is equivalent to your master's. So no matter the country that you come from, this website is a good indication of what the equivalents would be and what you would need to obtain in order to be admitted. And I posted another website here for the University of Alberta as well. And so those are just the general requirements for the master's and PhD, but some programs have more specific requirements that you need to meet. A lot of times, in order to apply to a graduate program, you have to submit a statement of research interest. So that's pretty much just a letter that is explaining what you're interested in, why you want to go to the school, and how their research facility can benefit you. Sometimes you'll also have to submit your previous work experience in the field as well. And also sometimes some graduate programs, they make you take something called a GRE or a GMAT. And so these are just standardized tests that you would need to obtain a certain grade for in order to be admitted. And so over here, I've also listed some websites that have the specific requirements and how you can find the specific requirements for each program. You guys are free to take a look at that when you get this PowerPoint. So that's step 3. And so after you have confirmed that you meet the specific requirements for the program that you want to apply into, the next thing would be to gather all of your required documents. So there's several required documents that you will need to submit in order to get admitted into the program. The first one being your transcript. So your transcript must be either in English or sometimes in French. So in Canada, we have 2 major languages, it's English and French. There's some places in Canada that are more French, and French is more dominant, but most of Canada is English. But I know, for example, I think if you apply to like the University of Montreal, which is mainly French, you may need to submit a French transcript, and you also, it may be enforced that you take a French literacy test as well. Um, and so your transcripts, they must be sent from a certified translator if you do have to translate them. And the transcript does not clearly indicate that the degree has been conferred, but you must also submit a copy of your degree certificate and diploma. So if your transcript just kind of gives the grades from your bachelor's, and it doesn't actually say that you've graduated, then you have to also submit a copy of your degree or your certificate or your diploma. And so initially, usually you just have to submit just an unofficial transcript, and then later on they may request for you to see an official transcript. So for the official transcript, that has to be sent directly from your financial institution. So it usually has to be sent on their specific letterhead with like a specific stamp that says that it's from your financial institution. And then so the next step would be to gather your letter of recommendation. And so this is also a very important step because up to this point, pretty much it's just a description of your academic accomplishments on paper. But a lot of times, in order to be admitted, they want to see, okay, who are you as a person? How can you benefit, their school pretty much? How are you in terms of research? How are you in terms of being just like your interpersonal skills and everything? And so the way that they can figure this out is from your references. So I would say that this is one of the most important parts to choose a really good reference, and who your references should be is number one, they should be an academic scholar. So unless a professional reference is required, you should usually get someone that is an academic. So either like a professor, or someone that is in the research field. And it has to be someone that can attest to your potential for graduate level of study or research. So someone that has seen you research, someone that knows your strengths in research. And the thing is, it can't be a family member, it can't be a friend, it can't be a classmate, can't be a TA, and it can't be an employee. So you can't just tell your sister to act as like your research supervisor because it's not going to work. And a lot of times they expect the email, like the recommendation letter, to come from a verified work email address. So if you do have a reference, make sure that they send it from like their work email address so that it's more official. If it comes from like a Gmail or a Hotmail or something, it probably won't hold a lot of weight. And so before you apply, it's really important that you let your references know that they will be submitting a document for you, maybe 2 to 3 weeks before you apply, just to give them ample time to get themselves together and to write a document for you. Because the worst thing that you can do is tell your referee that you want them to submit something um, like a day in advance because the reference letter may not be good, right? So it's best if you contact them ahead of time so that they actually have enough time to write a really good reference letter for you. Oh, and so next, so yeah, a lot of times also most institutions do an online letter for recommendations and they're usually confidential. And you just have to ensure that your referee knows the deadline as well. And so they can't, so once like, so for example, we saw the deadline of like January 1st, right? Everything, so all your documents, all your transcripts, your recommendation letters, they all have to be submitted before January 1st in order for you to be considered. Next step would be then to find out about any language proficiency requirements. And so you must understand the language of program that you're applying to and you speak it fluently. Sometimes an English or French language proficiency test may be required. I know that coming from Ghana, you don't need to take, they don't require you to take an English proficiency test. I'm not 100% sure about Nigeria, but you would have to look that up and see if that's needed as well in your application. And there's different kinds of English language tests. There's the TOEFL, the IELTS, CAN test. Those are just the English ones. And here are just the equivalencies. So if they say that you need like a minimum of 550 on the TOEFL paper-based test, but you took the IELTS, that's still fine. That just means that you need an overall average of at least 6.5. And like I said, for some schools, a French language test is also needed. And so these are the different kind of French language tests. It's the DELF, the test can, and those are the equivalencies as well. And then so the next thing that I think is probably the most important is to select a thesis supervisor. And so this is the most important step, just because when you're doing your master's and PhD, this is the person that is going to be overseeing your project, right? This is the person that you're going to be in contact with for your whole graduate school career. And so for a thesis supervisor, it's only applicable if you're applying to a graduate program with a thesis or a research paper. So I know some graduate programs are more course-based, and so you won't actually need to write a thesis. You won't really need to do much research. But for the ones that you do, you definitely need to select a thesis supervisor. So for the most part, you're allowed to pick the thesis supervisor, but sometimes the graduate school does pick it for you. So you'd also need to find that out, and it depends on your program. So I just want to go through this quite in detail because, like I said, I think it's the most important part. So the first thing is, let's talk about who exactly is a thesis supervisor. So your thesis supervisor must be a primary appointed, a cross appointed, or adjunct member of the program. So they have to be someone that works in the faculty and conducts research in the faculty or even in a faculty that's associated to your school. And they have to be an active member in your research development. So like I said, this is the person that is overseeing your whole research career pretty much during graduate school. And they also have to be someone that can meet with you regularly, and they should be accessible and responding to your inquiries. So I think that this is also something very important that you need to look out for, because luckily I've had very good thesis supervisors, ones that are, very available, the ones that you can go and talk to. But I do have some friends that have been in a situation where their supervisor is never around, right? And especially starting out, and especially if you're starting out with your master's and you have no research experience, you need someone for like the first few months to kind of guide you and walk you through it and to answer your questions. So if you have a thesis supervisor that is busy doing A, B, C, and D, not in the lab, not responding to emails, it can really make your years as a graduate student really frustrating. So it's definitely good to know. And just to, when you meet them, it's fair to even ask them, like, are you more a hands-on supervisor? Like, are you around? Are you more hands-on with your students? I think that's a very fair question to ask. Another thing is that they, as thesis supervisor, they supervise and they support the development of the thesis proposal and assess the final version. So a lot of times going into grad school, you have to write up a thesis proposal, and so that would just that will be to propose your idea of what you want to do your research on, and so they have to be the person that helps you develop it and approves it, so that you can send it off and get it approved by the faculty. They also have to ensure that the subject of the thesis proposal is suitable and feasible within the allowed time period. So a lot of times going into your graduate program, you won't actually really know how much work a project will take, right? But because your thesis supervisor has a lot more experience than you, they can kind of look at your proposal and think, okay, is this logical? Is this okay to do within a 2-year period for a master's, or like a 4 to 5 period for a PhD? They will also be the person to review and approve your thesis prior to submission. And they identify your thesis examiners to also approve the submission as well. So going into grad school, you need a committee, or yeah, you need a committee of appointed members, pretty much. So it'll be your thesis supervisor, and it may be like 2 or 3 other faculty members that will kind of help you birth your proposal, help you birth your project, and also um, pretty much be the ones to like ask you questions during your defense. And also your thesis supervisor, um, they have to verify that the student has received safety training required by the law. And so let's talk about now the traits of a good thesis supervisor. So a good thesis supervisor doesn't only have to be a good researcher, doesn't only have to be a good professor, a good teacher, but I think it's very important that they're a good mentor, an advocate, and an ally. So they have to be someone that, can mentor you, because like I said, going into your master's or your PhD, sometimes you have no research experience, you have no connections in that field, you don't really know what you want to do in life. So they have to be someone that can literally like walk you through it, okay? And like walk you through, okay, how are you supposed to get through this program? How are you supposed to get through this research? Again, luckily for me, I've had very great thesis supervisors for my master's and my PhD. And also, they have to be someone that can advocate for you. So I know closer to graduation, maybe if you're going to be looking for a job or looking to do a postdoc or even looking to get into academia, you need someone that will kind of pave the way for you, and someone that will say your name and recommend you to people in higher positions. Someone that can advocate for you, that you're a good student, that you're a good researcher, and can connect you with people in the field. They also have to be someone that's easy to communicate with. So it's very difficult when you have a thesis supervisor that it's hard to communicate with them. Like, they could be very awkward. I've been in that position before where I had my master's supervisor. He was a very, very nice man. He was just very, very awkward to talk to. And so like it was just every time you talk to them, you just feel very awkward. So you need to have a supervisor that's very easy to communicate with, someone that you can talk to, and just like share your difficulties with as well. Like I said before, they need to be available and reachable. That's very, very important. Also, they need to be respectable. So they need to be someone that
You said
that you can respect, and
you know that person. they come to your platform? What's the incentive for them? It's a side hustle.
Pardon?
I use
Oh,
it.
okay, sorry. So they have to be respectable. So they have to be someone that you can respect, and they have to be someone that can respect you. And that's also very important. I'll tell you guys a story. I had a really good friend in my master's. She wasn't in my research group, so we didn't have the same supervisor, but we met in a class that we took together, and her thesis supervisor was on my committee, and my thesis supervisor was on her committee. And so our research groups are really close, so we became friends. And so she was Egyptian and she was Muslim. And prior to her getting into that group, she didn't actually know too much about the thesis supervisor. She just researched him and thought that she liked his research. So she went into that group. And so during her master's, so she took 3 years to do her master's, which is a little long for a master's. And she was the kind of person that she would work from like 7 in the morning to like 7 at night. I would work from maybe like 9 to 4, but she would work like 12-hour days every single day of the week. Like she was a very, very hard worker. But then her supervisor just never supported her, always called her, always called her lazy, always said that like she wasn't doing enough. Whenever she would ask questions, like wouldn't reply to her, all that kind of stuff. To the point where she continued to work, work, work. Finally, he allowed her to graduate like 3 years later. But when she wanted to graduate, she wasn't allowed to, pretty much. He said that she didn't do enough work. He didn't see enough results, which I saw her work. She did a lot. And so she actually got to write a paper on her research project. Okay, so she got to, sorry. Okay, so she got to write a paper on her research project. But then after the paper, sorry, would you mind muting yourself? Just a little loud.
Sorry.
Okay, so
Why? Yeah. Okay,
she
thank you.
tried to write a paper. And so she did a paper on pretty much every single thing that she did during her master's degree. And she was primarily the person that researched the most and did the most research. However, the paper didn't get published until after she graduated. And she found out that her thesis supervisor didn't even put her as first or second author when she pretty much wrote the whole paper, but rather he put an undergrad that did like 10% of the work as first author. So later, she found out that actually her thesis supervisor was racist towards Muslims, and he had actually had a lot of prior experience with Muslim students who had said the same thing as well. So that's what I'm saying. It's very important to do your research on your thesis, your potential thesis supervisor. Talk to people in the faculty. You know, look through their group and talk to people and make sure that you know there's and make sure that it's someone that you know can respect you and someone that you can respect as well. And an important thing as well is to also make sure that the area of research is of interest to you. So there's a few things that I think it's important to do before contacting your potential supervisor. And the first thing is to kind of get a feel of the kind of research that they do. So the best way to do that is to read scholarly publications of the supervisor to see if the field of research and methods are tailored to you. Also to read previous students' theses who have been supervised by the professor. I think this is probably a good way to kind of get a feel of you know the methods that they use. It's a good way to get a feel of the projects that they're currently doing or the gaps in the research that you feel like you can fill. Another thing would be to talk with other students, either from the supervisor's group or from the department. This is also very important as well because entering a research group, it's not just going to be you and your supervisor, there's going to be other people around, right? So you really want to see if these are people that you can get along with, these are people that you can work with, because you're going to be working with them every single day for the next 2 to 4 years. So you really want to make sure that it's an environment, it's a good, healthy lab environment that you can thrive in. Next thing is to take a course or attend a seminar being given by the potential supervisor. Or you can make a list of questions to ask during the interview with your potential supervisor. You could also find out what research infrastructure the potential supervisor has. So you can look at, or you can even ask to come in and look at their laboratory, or even just ask them during the interview what kind of facilities they have, instruments they have, to see if it's good enough for you to carry out your research project. And before you meet your potential supervisor, it's best to come prepared with questions to ask. So, in order to request a meeting with a potential supervisor, the best way is to send an email and to introduce yourself. And in that email, you should state clearly what your interests are and how they match those of the professor. And you should also include information on your academic background and research experience. So, this is, I think, a very important part as well. So, this is a very important part because this is the very first impression that you're given to the supervisor. And so I found a document online. I didn't write this myself. I found an article where there's a professor that he was just teaching people, and he wrote an article on how to write a good email to a potential supervisor. So I'll read it first, and then we'll go through it bit by bit to see the different components and the things that you need to add to your email. So it says, Dear Dr. Newfield, my name is Jennifer Kuhan, and I am an undergraduate student at the University of Nanaimo. I am nearing the end of my honors biology degree in the Department of Biology, and I have begun to consider possible research labs for continuing my studies as a graduate student. The attached CV shows how my co-op program has provided me with hands-on microbiology work experience in government and academic research groups. Coupled with these work placements, several lab courses have equipped me with expertise in cultivation-based and molecular techniques. I have developed an interest in microbial ecology through these experiences, and my Bio 426 professor, Dr. Barbara Bassler, suggested that I approach you about the possibility of a graduate position in your group. Please let me know if there is a possible opening for a graduate student in the upcoming fall or winter terms. As shown in the attached transcript, my grades are strong, especially in the last 2 years. I will be looking into the possibility of applying for external scholarship support from one of the major funding agencies. You are welcome to contact my undergraduate research advisor and my work placement references listed in the attached CV. They are aware that I am applying for graduate positions as I step toward a career in microbiology. I'm available to discuss this possibility further, and I look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, Jennifer. Okay, so let's pick this apart and look at the things that you should add to an email and just the important things that are needed. So the first thing is your salutation. So as you see in this email, they used Dear Dr. Newfield. And so salutations are very important because this is the first thing, right, that your supervisor, your potential supervisor is going to read. So using Dear is probably best because it's not too endearing and it's professional and it's also formal. Saying hello. So if you're like, hello, Dr. Newfield, that's also a good alternative, but it may be a little informal. If you just start with Dr. Newfield, it's a little abrupt. And I find that whenever people just start emails with Anna, it's just kind of like, whoa, okay. So it's a little too abrupt. Using like hey or greetings or dear sir is a little awkward and poor judgment and a little impersonal as well. So again, I think you should either stick with dear or hello. So the next part is when she introduced herself. So in this section, Jennifer provides key background information about who she is and what university education you have received. So this should probably be next after your salutations, just so at least they know who's emailing them. And so as you see that she mentioned that she's she's considering possible research labs. So she's letting the supervisor know that you're not my only option. I have other options. And this is a good strategy just because, you know, if this is someone that the supervisor wants, then she knows that he can't delay in emailing her back. So if he reaches the email and is like, oh, this is someone that I would actually want in my lab, he's not going to be like, okay, let me just take my time. He'll probably email her back right away because she has other options. And so in the next part, she talked about how she attached her CV. And so it's very important to also attach, important documents within this email. So you can attach your CV, and make sure it's your CV and not a resume. So your CV, which is more detailed about your research experiments, your skills, your strengths. Um, and She also mentioned about how her co-op program has provided her with hands-on microbiology work. So I assume that this professor is in the field of microbiology. So it's good um, if you want to really just show your strengths and show that you have previously worked in this field and you have a little bit of experience. And so even just the way that she said it was that she's like, my co-op program has provided me. And she didn't say I gained through my co-op program. So saying things like writing emails saying like, I did this, I accomplished this, I did that, it sounds a little self-absorbed. So you always want to think about, okay, put the emphasis away from myself and think about how other things have benefited me. So you want to use a more passive tone when you're writing emails. She has also mentioned her previous research experience, and that's also very important because even if it's just like lab experience or something that is, minute, you can just blow it up as if it's like the most experience you've ever gotten in that field. Um, and it should be highlighted pretty early on in your research so he knows that this is someone that at least has some knowledge in the field. And also, if you have received publications, it's good to share them in this section as well. So in the next section, she says, I have developed. And so she didn't use contractions. She didn't say I've developed because, as you know, in scientific writing, you don't really use contractions. So you should write this as if you're writing a scientific paper, right? So saying I have instead of I've. And make sure that you're specific on your interests. So she specifically said microbial ecology, not just biology, not just microbiology. So make sure that you say specifically. So say if my supervisor is in carbohydrate chemistry, he's not just chemistry, but he specializes in carbohydrate. I can say I'm very interested in carbohydrate chemistry and not just chemistry, just to show that this email pertains to the professor that you're writing to. And a good thing to do is also to describe what made you reach out to this professor. So if it was you were going through the website and you read his research and it stood out to you, or if someone suggested that you should apply, or if you saw one of his talks at a conference, or if you read one of his papers, it's really good to include what made this professor stand out to you so that he knows that you weren't just scrolling through and you didn't just like choose random professors to submit your or to apply to. And also, as you can see, she mentioned the possibility of a graduate position. She didn't specifically say a master's or a PhD. So this is good because it kind of leaves it open that, even if you're just going into a master's, that you're still open to a PhD.